Cool. I think we are live now, guys. Hey, how's it going, guys? We have our Thursday night football stream. What we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the injuries that have popped up throughout the week, some of my favorite plays for the entire slate. If you guys have any Q&A throughout the entire process, feel free to throw it in the chat, that sort of thing, and we'll go through it. It can be one-on-ones, it can be strategy talk. Whatever you guys are wondering about, just let me know and we'll go through it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. These are going to be my projections for tonight. Wasn't able to beautify them for you guys or anything like that. There's still a little bit of work in progress. So again, it's gonna be a little bit black and white, but bear with me here. We have all the data at our fingertips here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go position by position, kind of break down how I expect the positions to lay out in terms of target shares, some of the better values at each position. At the end, we're gonna go through some strategy talk, some of the sleeper picks, some of the maybe situational analysis that you guys can do, getting ready for what happens if a guy goes injured, that sort of thing. We're going to talk all of that. So let's start with the QBs for tonight. We have Daniel Jones with the New York Giants, obviously. And on the other side of the ball, we have Taylor Heineke of the Washington football team. So Heineke stepping in for Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think we all know that by this point. Fitzpatrick is going to be on IR, not going to be returning for quite some time. And you can see that DraftKings has already priced him up all the way here to $10,200. So not going to be cheap by any means. I had actually ventured to say that he's overpriced on this slate. I only have him projected for 14.5 fantasy points right now. So not somebody I'm necessarily going to be playing a lot of tonight, but anytime you have a showdown QB, you have to at least have him in your player pool. So not going to be completely ignored or anything like that. I have him projected right now for 30 attempts, which, to be quite honest with you, isn't the greatest. I mean, I'm not expecting them to pass the ball very much tonight. I'm expecting it to be a run-first offense. We'll get to that here in a second, but you can see I have Antonio Gibson for 20.5 projected carries. So again, I expect the offense to run through Gibson rather than somebody like Heineke. But even as a result, pretty modest numbers right here. In terms of my analysis, my simulations, right around 245 yards on average, touchdown and a half per game. So very similar passing touchdown production as somebody like Daniel Jones. But where you really get the difference between these quarterbacks is when it comes to their rushing attempts, right? So Daniel Jones isn't going to wow you with his passing ability. He doesn't have a very strong arm, is very smart though, makes the right decisions, is a little bit more of a game manager at quarterback, but also has a little bit of rushing upside. We've seen it in the past, him garnering off those 60, 70-yard runs. I believe when he's a rookie, he had the longest rushing touchdown of anybody, any QB in history, I believe. It was like 85 yards, something like that. It's Daniel Jones that holds that record. So not necessarily something that you're used to. I have no idea what this guy's saying in here. Who knows? I don't know what the guy was saying in chat there. It's kind of weird. Anyways, so rushing attempts, we have him for 5 for 23 yards. Obviously, pretty solid right there. Daniel Jones has that rushing upside that you're looking for. Also, I see he has 0.3 touchdowns per game in terms of rushing touchdowns. So you like to see that. Somebody who has the rushing upside you're looking for, has a little bit of a floor with his passing as well. Something to mention as well is that I like targeting quarterbacks that are going to be trailing in these games. So as of right now, the Vegas line for this game is 3.5 points towards Washington. So Daniel Jones likely going to be playing from behind, going to have to throw the ball quite a bit in this game. So like targeting him on the quarterback side. Getting to the running backs here, the main target for tonight, no doubt, is going to be Antonio Gibson. Again, their offense is likely to run through him, especially with a backup quarterback. Again, they're not likely to be able to adjust for that right off the bat during 1 week. Saquon Barkley is on the other end of that spectrum, right? Coming off of injury, somebody who was questionable coming into this week, only saw 15 carries last week, and I expect that to stay relatively similar. Barkley, they're being a little bit cautious with him. I mean, obviously coming off that catastrophic injury, you don't expect him to be getting 20, 25 carries per game or anything like that. So you can see I have him projected for 15.5 attempts, which isn't horrible, 68 rushing yards, which you would take for a season-long fantasy league. But here on Showdown, where we're looking for ceiling performances, I'm not necessarily sure at $10,000 if 15.5 touches is going to be enough. So we see we also have him for 2.5 targets tonight, also 1.8 catches. So if he's going to get 17 touches, I guess there's a little bit of potential there. I mean, Saquon Barkley is capable of taking a 5-yard rush into an 80-yard touchdown, 5-yard catch out of the backfield into an 80-yard touchdown on seemingly any play. But perhaps that upside's a little bit capped with his injury of late. So not necessarily the best play for tonight. He's going to go low owned as a result. So perhaps you take that angle, but I'm definitely going to be targeting Antonio Gibson over somebody like Saquon Barkley. Let's talk about some of the backs that are a little bit of value of tonight. So I think there's definitely some for the Washington side. So like I mentioned before, I'm expecting a rush heavy offense, especially from Washington, a team that's probably going to be winning this game. Vegas has them as the pretty heavy favorites right here at 3.5 points. So you can see I have JD McKissick down for 7.5 rushing attempts, which actually, sorry, 5.5 rushing attempts, reading the wrong line right there, which isn't necessarily where he's going to make his hay. He's got 19.5 rushing yards right there, only 0.2 rushing touchdowns. So don't expect him to have a massive impact. But in terms of his catching ability out of the backfield, I expect that to be where he makes his hay. 3.5 targets right there. Also 2.5 catches per game, 30.5 receiving yards. Again, he's only $2,200. So if he goes out there, catches 3 or 4 catches for 30, 40 yards, that should be enough to pay him off on this slate. So I like the upside if he catches a touchdown. I like the floor as well because they're going to be relying on those running backs a lot more than usual. So that's who I like right there. You can see Gary Brightwell. He got a few carries the first time around. I'm not targeting him in this game. A lot of that was due to the situation of the blowout. Jared Peterson, same kind of thing. You got to carry the first game. It was in crap time. It doesn't really mean anything. So you're going to see some people play them because they got touches in the first game, but don't expect that going forward. Going down to our receivers here now. So in the receiver ranks, we have quite a few good options for tonight. So you can see, despite the lack of high-end QB play, I do expect there to be some decent wide receivers on this slate. It's just going to be making sure you pick the right one. So for me, my favorite receiver target by far is Kenny Golladay. You guys would have seen that on my initial DFS preview, but not only does he have a good projection for tonight, I expect him to probably score a touchdown. He's going to get plenty of red zone targets as well, especially with the mismatch against this Washington football team. He's also somebody who's not getting any ownership. Pretty much everybody and anybody is going to Sterling Shepard. He's just $200 cheaper. And Shepard got the bulk of the carries and the bulk of the targets there in week 1. So wasn't something that people expected. I think a lot of people thought Golladay would come in, even off the injury, be the number 1 wide receiver. But that just wasn't the case. I think a lot of that was due to situation. There in week 1, they were against a team with some good cornerbacks, a team that really pinched you towards the inside. And Daniel Jones, when he got into any type of trouble in week 1, checked it down to Sterling Shepard. So it definitely has some familiarity there. I think there's a little bit to be said with buying into Sterling Shepard. But when we take a look at the Washington football team defense, they have a ton of studs over the middle. There's somebody who is John Bostic in the middle, Cole Holcomb. They drafted a guy who's their backup middle linebacker, who's a pretty athletic guy as well. So in general, really good pass defense there. So I expect them to be spread out a little bit, to rely on the receivers, maybe a screen game, that sort of thing, especially when you're dealing with an offense like the New York Giants that isn't very efficient, right? They're going to hunker down on what the Giants succeeded with in week 1, and that was passes over the middle of the Sterling Shepard. The rest of the team wasn't very productive. Darius Slayton had just over 50 receiving yards, only 2 catches. Kenny Golladay had a pretty okay day, but that was because Sterling Shepard was killing it so much. So I expect a little bit of a different game plan this time around. Let's get into the projections here. So you can see I have Kenny Golladay and Sterling Shepard projected relatively close right here. You can see 7.5 targets for Golladay, 7 for Shepard right there. In terms of catches, a very similar dispersion, right? I think Galladay's a better receiver, so he's going to catch a higher percentage of his targets. Receiving yards, again, very consistent, right? Where you get the difference in the projection here, and where I think there's an edge is definitely with the touchdown production. Kenny Golladay is a much larger frame. And like I mentioned before, the Washington football team has some small corners. Kyle Fuller on the outside is not very big. The guy they drafted in the second round this year is not very big either. So somebody like Kenny Golladay, who has a large frame, is definitely going to get a lot of these red zone targets. So that's why I'm taking a look at him right there. Over somebody like Sterling Shepard. And when we take a look at the ownership, so I don't have my ownership projections on here. I'm still trying to get them narrowed down. They're a little bit wonky. Some of the guys that are a little bit cheaper, like at $200 and $400, are getting a little bit too much credit in my modeling right now. So don't want to, dish those out before they're perfect or anything like that, but they're getting close. Kenny Golladay is going completely overlooked. I have him at 13% ownership, which for a showdown slate, for a number 1 wide receiver on a showdown slate, is preposterous. So I really like Kenny Golladay in this situation. We'll talk about Darius Slayton. So he was somebody I talked about during my video on Tuesday. Darius Slayton, you see I have him for 13.6 points. Last year, we saw him have some ceiling games, right? Obviously, Kenny Golladay wasn't in the mix. He was playing more of a wide receiver too. But Darius Slayton, very athletic, good at high pointing the ball. So has a lot of rapport with Daniel Jones, obviously even more so than Kenny Golladay. So there's definitely a situation where instead of Kenny Golladay getting these red zone looks, they go to Darius Slayton. So I don't necessarily like playing them together. I think they're both a little bit touchdown heavy in terms of their production, but I definitely think one of the two is going to have a big night. So in lineups where I don't have Kenny Golladay, a lot of them have Darius Slayton. And when I don't have Darius Slayton, I have a lot of Kenny Golladay. So just wanted to put that out there. In terms of his projection, I don't know why I went the whole way over there. We have him for 6 targets, 5.3 catches, so pretty modest right there. He's not going to break the bank in terms of PPR, but pretty solid touchdown production, 0.3 touchdowns per game, getting one about 33% of the time for 57.5 yards. So I like those kind of numbers. They're good for showdown slate. Obviously doesn't project as well as somebody like Shepard or Galladay, but you're going to get some salary savings with that $6,600 price tag. You're also going to get a little bit of upside, right? Coming in with even lower ownership than somebody like Galladay, coming in right now at 11.5% projected ownership. I don't hate that at all. Getting down to some of these value targets, I talked about Adam Humphries during my stream. He has a ton of rapport with the backup QB, Taylor Heineke. So Adam Humphrey was playing the number 3 or even number 4 wide receiver for Washington. They obviously have their 2 stud wide receivers. You have Terry McLaurin. You're going to have Logan Thomas in the mix, everything like that. You have Dynamite Brown, who they just drafted. He ended up getting 4.5 targets last week, so he played the number 2. Then you have Adam Humphries. So Adam Humphries during the preseason wasn't getting a lot of these reps with the number 1 offense. So who was he getting reps with? That's right, Taylor Heineke, right? The backup QB now is thrusted into the starting role. So the guy that he has the most confidence in is going to be Humphries. We've seen him play that slot role before as well, be very effective in that Tennessee offense. So at $4,800, I really like the salary. I also really like his floor. So we can go over here to his stats. We have him projected right now for 4 targets, which for somebody in the $4,000 range is a lot stronger than you're used to finding. 3.5 catches. Again, he runs those shorter routes. He's more likely to bring in these targets. Just 34.5 projected receiving yards. Nothing flashy. He's not a deep play threat or anything like that, but getting a touchdown a third of the game. So relatively high floor. This is a guy who's going to get fed, especially when he has that familiarity with the quarterback there. Dynamite Brown, I had a few people mention him to me this week. Definitely a good sleeper pick for this week. The only unfortunate part is that everyone knows about it, right? So he's not necessarily a sleeper pick anymore. The industry is touting Dynamite Brown through the roof, got 4.5 targets in week 1, but I'm not necessarily sure that continues. Obviously, Fitzpatrick went down early, so we saw Heineke for a good amount in that game. And 3 of those targets to Brown were through Heineke. So there's something to be said there. I'm definitely going to be making my pull as a value play just because he's $1,400, right? That's a ridiculous price tag for somebody who's likely to be the number 2 receiving threat in terms of wide receivers on that team. And I just haven't seen the production from him yet. Even with those targets week 1, didn't do anything with it. I mean, had negative yardage actually. So didn't put up a good performance there in week 1, but definitely showed the potential for some type of volume in the future. Let's get to a question here because someone put one down here in the chat. So OT says, flex PPR, Waddle, Jacobs, Chenault, or Shepard. So I believe you're talking about are you talking about season long, or are you talking about for the week long slate? Go ahead and just let me know in the chat which are the 2 you're talking about, because obviously that matters a lot just in terms of scoring. So just let me know in the chat and we'll get to that question again. Let's go on to the, actually, we'll talk about Cam Sims a little bit too. Cam Sims week 1 kind of took over Dynamite Brown's production, poached a few targets from him as well. He's the number 4 wide receiver on this team, potentially number 3. You can kind of put Humphries and Cam Sims on the same type of tier. I don't really have that much confidence in the production. I just don't expect them to get targeted very much. So as a result, just 2.5 projected points there. All right, let's see. Did he put this week? Okay, so you were saying for this week, flex PPR, would you go for Waddle, Jacobs, Chenault, or Shepard? So for me, let me think about this. So we have Waddle playing against the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills, that should be a high-scoring game. Jalen Waddle obviously showed some familiarity with Tua week 1. I don't hate that at all. I assume you're talking about Josh Jacobs against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Avoid at all costs. No, that Steelers defense is legit. I'm not just a Steeler fan. I'm not a homer by any means. I say it as a joke. Obviously, I am to some extent, but the Pittsburgh Steelers defense is legit. You don't want anything to do with that. They're going to stuff the run at all costs. Laviska Shenault Jr., definitely a little bit more intriguing. I forget who the Jaguars are playing off the top of my head. Then you have Sterling Shepard. I think Sterling Shepard's the answer there, to be honest with you. Sorry, one second, guys. He said Raider Nation. I hope not. I hope my Steelers take it down this week. But yeah, if I had to go there, I'd say Sterling Shepard. I don't hate Jalen Waddle either. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna get into the tight ends. Here, one second, guys. I gotta grab a water. I had something stuck in my throat, guys. It was really bothering me. I don't know if you could see my facial expressions there. It was bothering me a little bit too much. I had to get some water there. Let's go into the tight ends now. So at tight end, we have two really good options tonight, and that's really about it. So on the Giants side of the football, Evan Ingram has already been rolled out of this game. So we're going to have Kyle Rudolph thrusted into the tight end one role at $3,200. He doesn't give you the worst set of value, to be honest. Somebody who's not going to get a ton of targets. He's essentially only going to get targets because he's out there. So you can see I have him projected right now for 5.2 targets. I even think that's a little bit aggressive. Could possibly come in closer to like 4 targets. 3 catches, that kind of thing. Isn't going to put up a ton of yardage. You can see I only have him down for 30.5 yards right now, but is a little bit touchdown dependent, right? When they get down in the red zone, they're definitely going to bring in that tight end to at least show some type of a bluff in terms of the run. And Kyle Rudolph has been excellent in the past off of play action. You know, we saw it up there in Minnesota, somebody who's very good at faking the run, kind of getting off, chipping off of his block, that sort of thing, and getting wide open. Could very well see that tonight. He's like an artist at it. Not athletic by any means. Again, you're not going to get a ton of that receiving yardage, but Kyle Rudolph, damned as he scored a lot of touchdowns. So don't hate him. He's obviously getting up there in age. But in terms of a value play at $3,200, you could do a lot worse. Logan Thomas, I absolutely love. He's $7,400. He's a 13-point projection. Pretty much gets targeted more than anyone in this offense except for Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin's the clear alpha male, but if there was a number 2 wide receiver on the team, it would be Logan Thomas. Obviously gives you the blocking upside. That's why he's a tight end. I'm projected for 4.5 catches, 5.5 targets. Nothing to write home about there, but is going to do a lot better with those targets in terms of yardage. Has a lot better yak ability. Also gets a lot more air yards than somebody like Kyle Rudolph. You can see I'm projected for half a touchdown per game. So you're going to see quite a few touchdowns from Logan Thomas. I believe scored 10 last year in his 16 games. So that might even be a little bit modest there at just a half a touchdown per game. But even with just a 13-point projection, is getting in plenty of my builds tonight. Somebody who, again, has a relatively high floor, but a good ceiling as well. Getting down to some of these specialist targets, so talking about the kickers and defense, I'm not thrilled about anything down here. The kickers, are kickers in Showdown. They end up being optimal about once every 4 or 5 events. So I'm going to sprinkle them in about 10-15% tonight. If I was going to have to choose one or the other, it would definitely be Graham Gano. You can see my projections, I don't have it that way, but in terms of price, that $200 difference could make a huge difference. I like targeting the team with a lower total on the kicker side, which might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but a lot of times the reason that total is a little bit lower is because they're not as efficient in the red zone. They're teams that stall out in the red zone. They kick a lot of field goals. So a lot of people don't consider that when it comes to those over-unders. So Graham Gano could have a chance to, kick 2 field goals tonight, maybe make a PAT or 2, and potentially be optimal. Now getting down to the defense/special teams, I don't like either of them, to be quite honest with you. So over-under tonight's only 40.5, which is one of the lower totals on the entire week. So a lot of people are going to be really tempted to go to these defenses. Obviously, Daniel Jones throws a lot of interceptions. Taylor Heineke's a rookie quarterback. So perhaps I'm kind of talking myself into them, but they're extremely chalky. Right now, Washington is considered to be one of the highest owned plays, period, on the entire slate at 22.5% ownership. And the Giants are garnering 18.5 projected ownership as well. So don't expect that, right? Defenses are optimal in terms of Showdown, maybe like once every 4, maybe 5 events, kind of like it is with the kickers there. But for them to be as high owned as they are, I just don't necessarily agree with that. You do have the turnover upside, but defenses, again, it doesn't pay off that often. Usually looking for one of those backup wide receivers, backup tight end, that kind of thing. They have much higher upside than a defense. Defense is pretty much capped off at about 12, 13 points worth of upside. Whereas if somebody goes out and makes a 70-yard catch and a touchdown, you're beating them on one play alone. So I like that kind of upside right there. And what I want to do now is kind of talk about a little bit of the strategy side of this. So that's the most important part of a Showdown. Obviously, the median projections help you with building your base lineups. But if you want to take down a GPP, you really have to think differently. And there's one of 2 ways to do that. The first way is to make it a completely unique lineup. Make sure that you're having a plus EV day and not duplicating your lineup with 1,000 other people. That's kind of like I don't even know, like the traditional way to play Showdown, kind of what most people do. They go out there, they put 4 or 5 guys in that are relatively good in median projections, and they include just one absolutely just bonkers play, right? They're trying to take somebody who's projected really low, has essentially no low ownership. I'm trying to make a unique lineup that way. And I used to play that way, especially when I was new to DFS about 3-4 years ago. But now that I have a lot more experience, every single lineup that you put in should tell a story. That's the best way for me to explain this. So you should be using situational analysis rather than median projection. It's something that I talk about a lot. I'm actually writing a book right now. I think I've mentioned that before to you guys about DFS strategy. It's something I talk about extensively. It's probably the most important part about DFS in general. It happens with golf. It happens with the NBA. It happens with NFL, like we're talking about right now. But what I talk about with situational analysis, and what I mean by that is you have to think about the way a game is going to play out. Right? If median projections happened every single time, every game would be the most boring game ever. Everybody would just have an average day. And we know that is far from the truth, right? Most of the time out here, a lot of wacky things happen. Players get injured, that sort of thing. And making sure you can account for that and kind of imagine the scenario ahead of time is important. So just to give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about, let's imagine a scenario tonight where Daniel Jones goes out and just absolutely blitzkriegs this defense. I mean, goes out there, throws 4 touchdowns, 300 yards, that sort of thing. Now, what kind of game situation would that create? So first, obviously, you'd need Daniel Jones in your lineup, potentially even at the captain slot. But more importantly, we know that the New York wide receivers are going to get a lot of production. We know that Washington defense is going to suffer. You wouldn't want that Washington defense or special teams in your lineup. You also know that likely the other team is going to be hyper aggressive. Now, this is the key, right? Obviously, correlating their own team with each other, quarterback and wide receivers is helpful, but correlating against that is even more important and really where you get your edge in Showdown. So if let's imagine, Washington's playing from behind, they're getting absolutely torched by Daniel Jones. They're going to abandon the run. It's very simple to understand why that would be the case. They're not going to be feeding Antonio Gibson because they need to score in bunches and quick. So in that kind of scenario, you're going to see a ton of JD McKissick. He's a better run blocker than somebody like Antonio Gibson. Also somebody who's much surer hands out of the backfield. Catches about 80-90% of the balls out of the backfield, which is excellent for a back. So in those kind of scenarios, you would want to play a lot of JD McKissick, right? You would want to be fading Antonio Gibson in those lineups. You might even want to consider going to some of the tertiary receiver options from the backup, so the team that's losing. A lot of times when there's a blowout, they'll be more willing to play guys like Dynamite Brown, players like Adam Humphries, that sort of thing, and give them more of a key role, especially in the third and fourth quarters. So that's what I'm talking about with situational analysis. We can talk about what happened on the other end of that spectrum. Let's imagine that Washington goes out and kind of like expected, holds this game, is leading for much of it, and potentially even blowing out the New York Giants. Now, what would that bring into the equation, right? Obviously, we want to be targeting a lot of these wide receivers for Washington. We'd be talking about Terry McLaurin likely having a very, very good day. Probably would be the captain you're targeting in that case. Logan Thomas probably has a touchdown. And if they're winning by a ton of points, we know that they're going to try and run out the clock, right? Antonio Gibson is likely to shatter that 20.5 rushing attempts mark, potentially putting up 25, even 26 carries. So in that type of a scenario, you're likely to want to have not only Taylor Heineke, not only somebody like Terry McLaurin in your lineup, but you're probably also going to want to try and fit in somebody like Antonio Gibson. As a result, you're going to be playing a lot of value plays outside of those guys, but you really have to try and keep these scenarios in conjunction before you make your lineup. So like I said, you want to kind of paint a picture or tell a story with your lineup. What we're going to do here, guys, is we're actually going to go on DraftKings and we're going to make a dummy lineup. So we're going to enter a contest. We are going to show you guys like the thought process I would go through in making a lineup, that sort of thing. So let me go ahead and bring that up here on DraftKings and we'll get into that. So here we go on DraftKings now. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Cool. So here we are on DraftKings now. This right here is the Millionaire Maker contest. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make a lineup for a million maker. So a little bit different than something like a cash game, a little bit different than a smaller field GPP. When you're playing the contest that has 197,000 entries, you sure as hell want to make sure that you're going to be unique. So we're going to have to think a little bit differently here, use a little bit of our situational analysis rather than our median projections. So let's go ahead and do that. In terms of so what we have to do is we have to decide what kind of game environment we're going to choose, right? So we have to choose that story before and make our lineup. And the most likely scenario tonight, in my opinion, if something's going to happen that's a little bit wonky, it's the New York Giants going out there and torching the Washington football team. Again, the line right now is 3.5 for Washington. A lot of people expect them to dictate this game. I mean, Antonio Gibson's a pretty stud runner. I mean, they have a pretty decent O-line there in Washington as well. So that is more likely than not to happen. But again, we're trying to find a little bit of an outlier performance here. And at least in my opinion, Daniel Jones is a little bit underrated. I expect that whole offense to be a little bit underrated. So we're going to use that as our option right here. It's definitely going to be a little bit contrarian. And I don't expect a lot of people to build this way. So I like that kind of uniqueness right there. And we can still make our lineup relatively optimal as well. So what we're going to do in that type of scenario, right, I expect one of these pass catchers for New York Giants to go off. That could either be Darius Slayton, we could take Kenny Golladay, or we could take Sterling Shepard. In my opinion, the only one of the three that I wouldn't want to choose would be Sterling Shepard. Again, he is by far the the most owned of all three of those. He's the least unique. So again, if we're trying to take a little bit of a different approach to this here, we wouldn't want to take the chalky option. So for me in this case, it's definitely going to be Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay is my favorite captain pick this week. Somebody who, again, I expect to have a very good mismatch against these smaller Washington cornerbacks. And if Daniel Jones ends up having a massive day, he's going to be a huge beneficiary. So we have Kenny Golladay there at the captain slot. We can see he's $12,300. So not the cheapest captain, but you want to make sure that you're squeezing somebody into that slot that's going to have a very good day. Obviously, you need the optimal play at captain to end up taking down one of these contests. And he has the kind of upside and the kind of ceiling to do something like that. So getting on to our next pick now, we know Daniel Jones has to be part of this equation. Like I mentioned, this is the scenario where Daniel Jones goes off and torches this Washington team. So I like using Daniel Jones there, especially with Kenny Golladay. So what we need to consider now is the type of value players that we can squeeze into this lineup. So we only have $6,800 remaining per player. We also need to try to get a run back there from the Washington team because, again, if Daniel Jones goes out and has a great game and Washington's playing from behind, they're absolutely going to have to throw the ball a ton. So one thing that comes to mind for me, especially for this New York side of the ball, is I like targeting in terms of value. I like going down to Kyle Rudolph. So like I mentioned before, an absolute touchdown machine. He's only $3,200. So helps us get up to just $8,000 remaining per player. So love to see that right there. In terms of the Washington side of the football, I also like taking J.D. McKissic. So like I mentioned before, if they're playing from behind, they're going to be in obvious passing downs. They're going to have to use J.D. McKissic for his blocking. And again, he's better out of the backfield catching the ball than Antonio Gibson. So if we end up doing that, we end up having over $10,000 remaining left per player. So maybe we don't even have to use Kyle Rudolph here. So we might backtrack, take Kyle Rudolph out, just because I think that McKissic has a higher potential for this game. So let's go ahead and get through the rest of our picks here. Let's go ahead and select both teams. So at this point, we have two really good value plays in our lineup. We also have guys that we expect to have ceiling performances in this type of game scenario. And what we need to do now is add some of the people that we expect to have, relatively okay games, above average performances. In terms of wide receiver, looking at 14 to 15 points, running back probably looking for like 12 to 13 points, that sort of thing. So in my opinion, we're looking for guys with the highest floor. In terms of that, Terry McLaurin sticks out. Again, if they're playing from behind over there in Washington, they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more than we expected to coming into this game. So perhaps we expect them to throw the ball 30.5 times going into this game. That's what I have Heineke projected for right now. Playing from behind, he's probably going to throw closer to 38, 39 times. I had McLaurin projected for 19 fantasy points. In that kind of scenario, he'll likely score even more, probably 21, 22 fantasy points. So I definitely like including them there at the flex. And at this point now, we have $12,900 left. So it's become very apparent that Kyle Rudolph is no longer necessary in our lineup. So what we're going to do is go ahead and take Kyle Rudolph out. So we need to replace Kyle Rudolph's production for the New York Giants side of things. And we can go ahead and do that with somebody who has a higher projection. So for me, there's only really two obvious options here. Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton, who I would go to. And honestly, Sterling Shepard's probably the pick right here. So I don't want to get too cute about it. Sterling Shepard got plenty of targets in week one. Like I mentioned before, projects very similarly to Kenny Golladay, just without the touchdown production. So we're going to go ahead and include both of them here in this lineup. And even with that, now we have $8,100 left for our last player, more than enough salary. So what we're going to do here, we could either go with Logan Thomas here, or we can go with Darius Slayton. In my opinion here, guys, you almost certainly want to, sorry, not Darius Slayton. You want to go with, not Logan Thomas. Sorry, guys, I can't speak right now. You want to go with Darius Slayton. So if we were to pick somebody like Logan Thomas right there, you'd only have $700 remaining on the table. And if you're playing golf DFS, something like that, that would be more than enough uniqueness. You don't need to leave more than $700, $800 on the table to be unique there. But this is showdown. We have 197,000 entries to compete with. So I'm looking to leave almost $1,000 on the table to stay unique. Not only that, so Logan Thomas also projected for 13 points. I have Darius Slayton projected for more, 13.4 points. He's also part of that stack where Daniel Jones goes off. In this game theory, we're expecting that Daniel Jones goes out, has a very good game. He's obviously going to be targeting a lot of people on his team. Darius Slayton could go off, so could Shepard, so could Galladay. On the other side of the ball with Logan Thomas, he runs a lot more shorter routes, right? He's somebody who's a little bit more of a safety blanket, going to get plenty of targets, but if they're playing from behind, is that what you're looking for? You're looking for the guy who gets 5 to 10 yards? No, right? You're looking for the guy who can catch 50-yard bombs, kind of get that team back in the game. So that's why I went with Terry McLaurin there. So if this lineup ends up winning the $1 million tonight, I want my cut, but that's what I wanted to go over with you guys there. That's all I've got for this live stream. I don't want to, take it on for too much time. If you guys have any questions and you guys are watching this on replay, go ahead and feel free to put them down in the chat. As of right now, the injury report is very consistent for what we saw earlier in the week. Evan Ingram is out. Obviously, Ryan Fitzpatrick not playing quarterback. On the Washington side of the football, there aren't any other injuries. On the Giants side of the football, it's all backups that are hurt. So not a lot to write about, not a lot that's going to change before lock. But if anything comes up, if there's any questions, feel free to let me know as always. But I'm going to have my next live stream going on here at 7 p.m. for any of the golf guys out there. We're going to be going over showdown for tomorrow's slate at the Fortinet Championship. Quite a few things that I noticed about the golf course today that were a little bit different than what we thought going into the week and whatnot. So want to go over that, want to go over some of those plays. And for anybody stopping by then, I'll see you guys then.